So again, good morning, everyone. We will be starting now. I mean, people will be still coming in. Thank you, first of all, for registering and coming and joining this webinar, which is the official and public launch of the Future Resilience Project, which is a EU Horizon Europe funded project, which will keep us busy and entertained during next 3 years, working on a couple of topics that are quite hot right now in the public agenda, and we will be developing some new solutions that we will try to make them help to improve the capacity of preparing better policies and try to anticipate what we call the future crisis. But it's not me that's going to talk about the importance of the topic in the policy agenda, but I will give the word to Alasdair, which is the executive director of EFIS Centrę, who is coordinating the project. And then we will have 2 sessions, and we will come in a second about the agenda. Yeah, this is it. So we will have 2 sessions in this webinar. One is about the role of R&I in fostering resilience, and the second session will be about anticipatory resilience. At the beginning, we will have an introduction of the project, and let me tell you, just in terms of practicalities, you may have a chat option and a question and answer button that you can use to post questions along the webinar in both of the sessions, and also at the end of the webinar we will open the floor for questions and discussion. So feel free to use it. If there is any issue with that, we will try to make the possibility of opening the mic so you can do the questions, Lieve, if you want. So Alasdair, floor is yours.
Yes, good morning. I hope everyone can hear me. So it's nice to have a full room of people, even if we're virtual. It's good to see people interested in this project, but also in the topic, the broader topic. As Matias said, we started since early January, the consortium on working on the topic of societal resilience and how to use research and innovation results to improve societal resilience. And I think we can look at it from a range of perspectives, from the perspective of a citizen on the street who is worried she or he has different issues that they have to face up to in their daily lives. They had floods or droughts in the last years due to climate change. They have migration impact on their communities due to people being displaced in other parts of the world. Energy prices are going through the roof due to the war and so on. So I think that people are on the street are very aware in their daily lives of the need to be or to find and improve their own resilience, and are often struggling to face up to these questions and find solutions. And in the policy making level that we tend to work with, at least at EFIS Centrę, the policy makers at European level, national level, regional level, city level, and so on, are obviously looking to see how to make sure that societies, whether it's at national level or local levels, are made more resilient to the shocks that are coming. So if we're looking at it from the research and innovation policy perspective, which is one of the perspectives we can draw on here, research and innovation policy has over the last 2 or 3 decades moved from a very, I would say, technology-driven approach to solving problems or developing solutions, to one that involves much greater integration of the needs of society, the needs of people, the needs of the other beings on this planet, not just as humans, in terms of the ecosystems and biodiversity that we all depend on for living. And so policymakers, and particularly in the research and innovation area, are also looking to understand how can the investments that are being made through research and innovation policy feed into results that are actually applicable and applied. So I think in the terms of resilience, this is what we're trying to do through the project, is to see how to mobilize, use and apply the investments that have been made by the public sector, but also by private or social third sector organizations, charitable foundations and so on. How can we apply those research and innovation results that are available often, but maybe require the understanding of groups of citizens or other stakeholders in our cities or regions in order to become something that's operational and applicable to their daily lives. And testing and understanding how those solutions can work, different solutions coming from research and innovation, is something, again, which is increasingly on the policy agenda. So citizen engagement, living labs, testing and demonstration of solutions in real life situations is something which is seen, I think, again, if we go back 20, 30 years, was something that was done mainly on market research basis, if you like, but is now very much based much earlier in the research and innovation process. And finally, the topic of foresight, which is, again, has been there for decades in many ways. I remember discussing it in the early 2000s, and I was reviewing a paper recently for the European Commission's Policy Support Facility, which is running a mutual learning exercise involving a set of member states on the topic of foresight. And was reminded of work that was done back in the early 2000s, trying to capture how foresight can support research and innovation policy making and so on. So foresight's been there as well, but again, how can we use that foresight capacities to help policymakers, citizens, other stakeholders in our research and innovation systems anticipate the sorts of research and innovation we need to be working on, but also, as I say, how to make that as applicable as possible and as an operational way and as effective way as possible to make our societies as more resilient in the future years. So I think I've probably taken up my time looking at Matias, but I just wanted to say a few words in introduction. I think we're going to have a very stimulating couple of sessions with very esteemed colleagues from both the European Commission in one case and across different actors from the project. So I will hand back to Matias. I think he will introduce the session one and hand over to the chair of session one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alasdair. And indeed, it's important you have done this this overview of the importance of the topics in the policy agenda and also how they have evolved in the time. And indeed, one of the most important questions here is why we are doing this project is that the number of crises and how they are hitting and impacting the societies are increasing, and they are really posing different questions to policymakers on how to really deal with the crisis. So our project is actually trying to provide a solution to this and try to contribute to what it's already a topic in the academic agenda, which is stop being reactive to crisis and try to see if we can anticipate and mitigate the effects beforehand. And this is the idea of the project, is to try to provide solutions not only to policymakers, but to different stakeholders making decisions in the everyday life and on how to tackle these different crises. And what we have seen is that there are too many projects, very interesting, working on different type of crises, but there is still this idea of working in silos. While in the academic environment, there is a lot of discussions about the cascading type of disaster or crisis, there is a little bit done in terms of the possible solution. So the idea for us is to try to provide a solution in terms of the project that can help people to face different type of crisis. So we are not thinking of facing only a flood or only an earthquake or a financial crisis or a migration, but try to provide solutions that can make societies resilient and economies resilient, even if one crisis will come one after the other. And for doing that, what the project will do actually is to develop two main tools. So we will prepare a knowledge base in which we are going to map policy relevance research results that have been tested and has been proven as successful. And for this, it's very important that there are too many projects ongoing and already concluded that they really have tested solutions in these different areas of crisis. So the idea is to create a database that can be accessible for everybody to see the solutions and eventually tailor them in their local context. And for doing that, we are also prepared a toolbox in which we are going to explain how they can actually work with this set of solutions that we will collect in this knowledge database. This is something that we are going to test through 10 pilot cases, and this is actually the core of the project. The project is an experiment itself, and it will contain a lot of experiments in the core of the development. And we have already 3 pilot cases. One is the municipality of Murcia, one is the municipality of Chios in Greece, and the other one is the Bulgarian Association of Personalized Medicine in Bulgaria. And they are talking in different type of crisis. And the idea of sharing this information is to make you understand that we are not working only with cities or only with regions, but we are also working, for instance, with NGOs. And the idea is also to expand this into different type of stakeholders, because when there is a crisis, everybody is hit. It's not only the public administration or only the business sector. So the idea is that we want to really show the importance of working together to tailor solutions that will bring benefit to the whole society. In the second part of this year, and around probably June already, we will start launching an open call, because there will be 7 pilot cases that can apply for funds that we will coordinate. And the idea is to join the existing 3 with different thematics. So what we would say is, please stay tuned in our social media channels and in our website, which is going live next week already with all this information. So you can share with people that may be interested in working with us. We will have a team of experts. Some of them are part of the speakers team of this webinar that will guide you through this construction across 1 year of a pilot about how to really develop solutions for your context. This will end in the 3rd year with, of course, a mutual learning exercise between the pilot cases, because we also believe that there is a very relevant and it's very important to share the different experiences of creating solutions in different contexts. Sometimes we think that something may not be applicable in another context because it's a different context and there are different settings, while sometimes there could be some ideas that could be taken and re-elaborated in a different context, and that could actually help develop even better solutions in the European context. And along this, we also will have a very high interaction with policymakers at European level, but also at national level. So if a project is working in a member state, so policymakers in the pilot cases can also join these policy debates, because the idea is to work with these 2 visions: is on the citizen side to collect possible solutions and possible ideas that they will have, and see how they perceive the reality, how they perceive the crisis, the risk, and how they perceive the possible solutions, but also on the policy making, because at the end we are in representative democracies that needs of this, and we have a bit of the policymakers that will guide us on what would be the solutions in the future. So saying that, I will stop here, and I will just invite you all to follow us on the social media, because there we will be posting many updates on the project, and there will be this one of the channels for you to approach us, and also to follow our website. You can put it in your favorite bar in your navigator in the computer, because it's going to be trending for the next 3 years. I will give the floor to Jörgen Sparf to start with the session 1. Jörgen is a senior researcher at the NTNU Social Research, which is a Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And he's also an associate professor in sociology at the Mid-Sweden University, and working at the Risk and Crisis Research Center, which is also one of the members of the consortium. which is actually taking a very important role because we are going to do some simulations during the third year also, which is something very interesting. And maybe, Jörgen, you can say a few words about that. So floor is yours, session 1. You have the time for your debate.
Thank you very much, Matias, for that introduction. Good morning, everybody. We have half an hour to talk about the role of R&I in fostering resilience. And the main speakers really are Florian Roth from the Zurich University of Applied Sciences and Michał Miedzinski from the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. But I was asked to set the stage a little bit, talk about resilience and crisis and how they might relate, and also to say a few words about how resilience approaches potentially can inform action in emerging crisis. So that's a quite difficult task, of course, and a huge topic, but I will give a little bit of thoughts based on the literature. So we have just started the project. So this is not results from the project, but based on previous knowledge and published literature. And as you know, human beings have always faced crisis from way before civilization until today and into the future, at least if we talk about crisis as the experiencing of a time of great difficulty, danger, or suffering. And in later history, crisis management has developed as an organized way to deal with such difficulties, regardless of whether they pertain to individual, organizational, or levels, or the wider society. And today, crisis and the way we manage them is generally about preparing for large acute problems with massive negative impact, and again, on any of those levels from individual to society. So in short, crisis management is about being ready to react and not so much about being proactive. And of course, that is debatable, but at the end, it's mainly about dealing with major events and take care of them, make sure that they go away. And this is done chiefly through programs, plans, and training, how to respond and how to recover. And it's also based on, let's say, bounded or contained crises, such as one hazard or a few hazards that has an impact with a limited geographical area and typically within one or very few political spheres. Now, modern society is organized with a large number of complex systems. So in the further development of crisis management, new approaches have arisen. One of the most prominent being resilience. And of course, resilience was not created from within crisis management, but it has gained a lot of traction in this field. And the majority of current policies refer to resilience as the ability of systems and societies to prevent, resist, absorb, and recover from disruptive events. So there is still a distinct similarity between resilience and crisis management in dealing with adversities. And resilience can very well be applied in a technical sense, such as the robustness of infrastructures or the management of something particular, such as fresh water. But it can also be framed as a way to govern, or as a political vision, or a shared or a common mindset among actors and stakeholders. So in that sense, resilience is much more abstract and openly defined term than crisis management, and sometimes resilience is referred to as a boundary object, which comes from theory, of course. And a boundary object is, unless you know it already, any object that is part of multiple social worlds and facilitates communication between those social worlds. It may have different identity within each social world, but as a result, a boundary object must be simultaneously concrete and abstract, fluid and well-defined. So depending on what kind of actor you are or what kind of organization, you might have different understanding of resilience, but it's still a way to communicate between actors and organizations. And I think that this is a good way to understand resilience, not only in the Future Resilience Project, but also in relation to crisis management. Now, I had a question posed for this talk is how can resilience approaches inform action in emerging crisis? And to answer this, I think it's helpful to juxtapose two dimensions of crisis management and resilience, time and scope. And I will finish with just going through those two dimensions a bit. Regarding time, the way I understand a crisis, they are typically short term. They, of course, we have also long-term crisis, but intrinsically with an ending, the crisis will ultimately be over at some point. There is also models that talk about this in terms of speed of development and speed of termination. And I'm sure many of you are well aware of fast-burning crisis, slow-burning crisis, cathartic crisis, and long shadow crisis. So different ways of looking at time within crisis management. On the other hand, resilience is typically about long-term. Even if we talk about absorptive coping capacity, we talk about longer processes rather than acute events. And then if we stretch it out even further in time, we talk about adaptive capacity, not just absorptive, but also adaptive, which require a bit of flexibility. And finally, there's also the transformative capacity. And I know that my fellow speakers here will touch upon this transformative capacity further on. So as you can see, it's the time horizon and the real or imagined ending that are the two main differences regarding time between resilience and crisis management. So if resilience approach can or should inform crisis management, it would be to integrate aspects of different timescales and the potential life after the ending of a crisis. The second dimension of resilience and crisis management is scope. And by this, I mean how wide a particular activity should stretch. So crisis management is by design limited to specific topics, typically at least. And this is not to say that crisis management is easy or more simple. It's just that it's focused on a limited set of contingencies within a defined field. Resilience, on the other hand, can comprise pretty much anything and everything. And this vagueness is, of course, it's abstract, but it's not necessarily a problem. It's definitely a challenge. But there are methods and ways to work with this openness to make resilience thinking become helpful. And I'll just give you two examples. Sarah Miro and Joshua Newell developed a process tool asking the crucial questions: resilience for whom, for what, for when, for where, and why. And by asking such questions, one is able to define the scope of resilience. Now, their model was particularly based for urban resilience, but it can probably be applied for resilience in general. And the other example I want to highlight is Yehis Tadele-Maru with colleagues who developed a resilience model in which there are two loops that meet. So there's a desired resilience loop and a vulnerability loop, and they meet like a Venn diagram, and at that intersection, they talk about adaptive capacity, and that is driven by the implications of distance or remoteness to different resources. So this model highlights the importance of the actual place and the actual context where resilience is expected to happen, and I know Michał will talk more about this later. So in summary, the ways resilience approaches can potentially inform action in emerging crises, they are to consider time horizons and crisis endings, maybe in the plural, because we can imagine different endings, and also to use resilience models and tools for reflective thinking. So those are just some thoughts from my side, and with that I will leave over to Florian Roth. Roth, I guess, is a senior researcher at the Zurich Institute of Applied Sciences. Florian holds a PhD in political science from University of Constance, and he has worked at the ETH Zurich and the Fraunhofer Institute for System and Innovation Research also within risk and resilience. Among other things, Florian has worked on the management of migration crisis 2015-16, the COVID-19 pandemic, and also on the implications of the war in Ukraine for Europe's energy supply. And right now, working mostly on resilience, innovation, and sustainability, and the links in between those. So Florian, I will hand it over to you to talk about how research and innovation can contribute to creating more resilient societies.
Yes, thank you very much, Jörgen, for your kind introduction, and I'm tempted to respond quite directly to some of the points that you raised. Like also, like I find it very interesting, like the two poles with the time and scope dimension. I think like there's a lot like that we can learn from innovation research, my main topic for the management of crisis and for building resilience. And maybe I start with like the basic observation that to me a defining characteristic of any crisis is that it's a new situation, something that we haven't experienced. We probably also don't know how long it will take. Like in hindsight, it's easy to say, like, okay, this is a clear beginning, this is the end. But if you think of like the COVID crisis, and I've been involved in a project with different Fraunhofer institutes, there we clearly observed that when you are in the crisis, it's not clear exactly like at which stage you are, and then often like you think you already made it through, but in fact you're just like waiting for the next wave of the pandemic in this case. So, and often like the different phases of the crisis are actually overlapping, and this really challenges the established models that we have for risk management and crisis management, where we have like, which I think like they were developed in a context, let's say like earthquake, where you typically you have like a major shock, even you're not always sure if it's the major shock or if the major shock is still to come. But leaving that aside, you assume, okay, there's a pre-disaster phase, crisis phase, and then like a recovery phase. But if you think of, for example, the pandemic, it's actually like it wasn't so clear at all. But I think like, and then that brings me to the point about innovation. Like what's really defining is like that each crisis is new, and we don't have a plan how to deal it. Otherwise, I wouldn't call it a crisis if we know exactly what to do like that. And it's like rather something standard, but at least to my definition, it's something like a situation where we are uncertain how to respond to it. We are uncertain how long it will take, and we have to come up with new answers to overcome the crisis and to develop further. And to this end, we have to improvise. We have to be bricoleurs. We have to be innovators under high time pressure. And yeah, I mentioned the COVID crisis, but also like in the studies I was involved in on the refugee crisis, we observed that organizations have to adapt and develop creative solutions under this high time pressure. And also you could think of like the war in Ukraine and how this put decision makers under pressure to find creative answers under a very short time. And if we think of like, and I think like the understanding resilience not only as the ability to bounce back, but also as the ability to bounce forward is very useful in this context, because it can provide us a very powerful, I admit a very complex and demanding, but also very powerful concept to understand how we can deal with such disturbances, shocks, but also like to build something that is sustainable on the long run, that is allows us to survive and flourish on the long run. And with colleagues from Fraunhofer, ISI, we did a study trying to look into like what does innovation research has to offer, and we came up with like 5 approaches from innovation research. I think like innovation research has a lot to offer to our understanding of resilience and for building resilience, because that's like the $1 million question, so to speak. Like, how can we design and implement policies to actually build resilience? Because typically we think of resilience as something that has to grow like from the like a roots concept, not something to be imposed from top. But nonetheless, we wanna come up with policies that help the resilience to grow. And I think like innovation research has some interesting ideas, and then like from like systemic instruments, like building regional hotspots for innovation. I'm sure Michał will talk about this in a minute, and I'm curious to hear about that. But also like how to strengthen like the ability of a system to react to weak signals, how to self-organize. I think like there are really interesting approaches in innovation research, which has exactly tried to find approaches to cope with challenges about for 50 years or so, and we can use this to also build transformative resilience. I think that's an interesting point there. And in turn, and I'm going to finish there, we can also learn a lot from resilience approaches for innovation research, because like if you look at how innovation policies look today, it's often like they don't really take into account the uncertainty, the complexity of complex systems, even though like innovation research often tries to take a systemic perspective. The policies are really, if you think of like mission-oriented innovation policies, for example, something I've been working on, like it's really like often based on the assumption that we have a clear understanding of the functioning of the system and of the effects. And I think like we can learn a lot there from resilience perspectives, also to make our innovation policies more robust, more flexible, more adaptive, and also more transformative. So thanks very much, and hand it over.
Thank you very much, Florian, for that insightful talk. It's very interesting to hear about what you said, and in particular, I think the experiences from COVID-19, and of course, we will learn a lot for many years from this pandemic. Okay, thank you. With that, I will leave over to one of our members of the advisory board, Miedzinski. Michał is policy and economic researcher at the Territorial Development Unit at the JRC, the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, where he coordinates the unit's research on innovation and sustainability transitions. Michał has something that we really worship in this field, interdisciplinary background, which is fantastic. He has a background in regional development, innovation studies, and environmental sustainability. Before joining the European Commission, he was senior researcher at the UCL, the Institute for Sustainable Resources there in London, where he led the policy research for the Green Innovation Policy Commission and engaged in collaboration with a number of organizations, the World Bank, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, and the European Commission. He also led a team on green economy at Technopolis Group before then. And finally, he also co-founded and coordinated the European Eco-Innovation Observatory. Despite his interdisciplinary background, his PhD is in planning from the University of Manchester. And Michał, You will talk about place-based R&I policy. What is the role of place-based R&I policy in contributing to addressing societal challenges and sustainability? So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jörgen, for this very kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm also very happy to be part of the project. Yes, the interdisciplinary background is also, it can be also a curse in some places. It doesn't necessarily make your life much easier, but I'm fond of it. I I will split my short contribution in well, basically two parts. I mean, one is to give you say a few words about what we do here that starts connecting with resilience research, and then my take or our take here on what indeed resilience research can contribute to place-based innovation policy, and the other way around maybe. And yeah, I mean, as Matias said, this is a beginning of a long journey, so it's kind of a teaser. As Jörgen, as you said, I'm on the territorial development unit. The unit does a very comprehensive work and diverse work on looking at territorial development, ranging from looking at places, villages in rural, urban context, but also at regions, macro regions, and so on. Colleagues work on diverse issues. We sit on probably the largest database of territorialized data in Europe that informs flagship Commission reports, such as cohesion report. I am more on the end of policy research crowd that looks at how research can inform better policy making and strategy making. And we, in recent years, as I mean, Alasdair already mentioned that we witnessed a big shift in the approach to research and innovation policies. We see it clearly that there is an explicit focus on sustainability objectives, and the language is changing. We're talking about transformative innovation. We're talking about sustainability explicitly. This obviously changes the context enormously. And it also creates a space for resilience type of thinking, as and more transformative resilience type of thinking, as the way, this is my interpretation of it, we look at resilience is more in the context of resilience along the development pathways different territories travel, take a journey. So it's more bouncing forward, but bouncing in an evolutionary way. It's a slow process, albeit with a desired direction. So this is, broadly speaking, understanding of resilience. And what I would like to focus here on is this phrase place-based. What does it really mean? Well, traditionally, the unit I joined only a year ago, but the unit has been working for many years on smart specialization strategies. So for those in the audience who are coming from another context, these are, broadly speaking, place-based innovation strategies that would then allow regions to benefit from structural funds of the European Union. And they were always place-based. Traditionally, place-based meant that they were to use effectively local assets, that they were to capture localized emerging opportunities of development, and mobilize local stakeholders, mobilize local knowledge. So this was place-based. What happens with place-based when we move into transformative approach to policies, where it changes substantially? And from the resilience point of view, we know that it's difficult to deal with resilience without looking at the characteristics of specific place. Places differ substantially in how they are exposed to different risks, different processes, how sensitive they are to them, and obviously in their capacities to overcome them. And this is the last point, is a direct link with what research and innovation policy can do, let's say, for regional development, considering what we know, what we can learn from transition literature, innovation studies, and I would say increasingly resilience work, especially social ecological resilience approaches, where this transformative approach to resilience comes from. Before I joined JRC with colleagues here, we did a study when we conducted a comprehensive literature review on where to look for inspirations for this new approach to transformative place-based research and innovation policies. And well, we'll look at the inspiration in sustainability transitions. So those of you who know the literature, the focus there is mostly on socio-technical system and transition pathways, let's say, that these systems undergo. But we also look explicitly at what these new approaches to innovation policies can learn from social ecological resilience literature, which is not done very, very often. And well, and to our, maybe should I say surprise, but I mean, there's a lot of alignment, but there's also a lot of new aspects that the socio-technical approaches do not explicitly focus on. I mean, first of all, social ecological resilience eventually looks at ecosystems explicitly. Socio-technical approaches don't do that. Even if often, they use the phrase sustainability transitions, they focus on socio-technical realm. Socio-ecological resilience explicitly look at the co-evolution between social, technical, and ecological systems, which I think is absolutely crucial. So it extends the systemic view, the scope of that the policy should consider. Second, and I think this is particularly interesting, if we look at the resilience literature and especially take a longer view of development, we have this point, a strong point supporting nurturing diversity and even redundancy in socio-economic or socio-technical systems or innovation systems, because we know we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We need to think about alternative ways of development in different territories to anticipate different shocks, to anticipate global trends that may not go into direction we anticipated. And this is pretty significant for policy and investment decisions, as it suggests strongly we should not look at purely kind of effectiveness-driven way of looking at policy. Last but not least, there is a strong emphasis on the role of localized social learning and the role of local knowledge coming from local stakeholders in order to put it simply, make better local policies. As what we can learn from global models and models that look often at the national level has to be complemented by the local knowledge, often coming from informal sources, looking at indigenous knowledge and so on. This also implies a different approach to the process of making innovation policy. So in short, just to finish, I mean, the question was how this place-based approaches can contribute to a more resilient, let's say, societies. I mean, the research innovation policy can still play its traditional role in a way. It informs better investment choices. It brings formal knowledge. It obviously can mobilize existing and emerging technologies, innovations to drive development, but it also changes the way to the process of making the policy. So it's also about the journey, as we do need to reach out to different types of knowledges, nurture learning, experimentation to keep on checking if we are on the right track, and keep on anticipating and also actively creating new agency to push us into a desired, let's say, direction of development. The discussion will continue, and I'm really curious about the reactions from the crowd. And it's just to say that it's really a pleasure to be involved in a discussion with people coming from such different backgrounds. I think we'll learn that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michał, for these insights from the JRC and beyond. It's very helpful for this project, I think, to have these perspectives on territory and socio-ecological systems, etc. So thank you very much for that. Matias, am I correct that we can steal a few minutes for a short discussion? Okay. So. Yes. Because we have one common question, and then I saw there's also a question in the chat, so maybe we can find the time to discuss those a little bit. First of all, this project one of the things that we will do in this project is actually to be able to recommend policymakers and governments on how to build better social resilience with the help of RNI. But already now, Florian and Michał, what could governments do, you think, from where you are right now on different administrative levels to apply RNI better to build societal resilience? Florian, would you like to start?
Yes, I certainly can. I think like it's first of all we have to make a bold investment into innovation. I think like we too long we have focused on efficiency, short-term efficiency, and there's a clear not a dilemma, but there's a tension between like short-term efficiency and resilience, because you just can't know what you will need like on the long run. So if you just like try to optimize everything according to efficiency criteria, you're not gonna build resilience on the long run. I think that's pretty clear. So we need investment into broad competencies. We need like basic research. If you think of the development of like the RNA vaccines that proved super useful in COVID, I mean, like this was based on research to fight cancers, so a completely different field. No one would have expected that this would like be a game changer in the fight against like a corona virus. So we also have to have we have to have the how to put it, the confidence to also like invest in some basic resources and to be able to that we are able to activate within a short time. And if you just to give that other example about Ukraine, it's not about like that you sometimes resilience is understood like that we need like redundancies and then like have to have super robust systems. I think like that's not possible and also probably not desirable, but we have to be able to have the basic competences to react if the circumstances are changing, and we have to align research and innovation policies along those principles. We have to get that thinking into the policymakers' heads, and then for the moment, it's slowly coming, but it's too slow.
Yeah. No, and I agree that sometimes I've met a very different example, but I met people who are preppers. So they prep their homes, they stockpile things and build shelters, etc., for themselves and their family, which fine, they can do that. That's great. But if that's the only thing you do, that's only one technology you can use in order to meet the future and be resilient. And it's a very, let's say, depressing pathway if a society would choose that way on a grander scale. So it's always, I agree with what you're saying, that you have to find a way to be dynamic and flexible enough to reorganize, to restructure, having resources to draw upon and redundancy, but not going for one thing only, because then it's, I don't think that would work. Michał, do you want to chip in on this discussion?
Yes, although carefully, I should remind myself that now I'm the European Commission. So, however, I mean, just to say that there's already a lot going on, and I think we should give credit to governments at different levels for the efforts they are making. So, there's a lot of experimental approaches in place. My colleagues have been doing a lot. I mean, colleagues working on Foresight, running policy labs, nurturing these experimental approaches, bringing different stakeholders around the table. There is a lot of discussions on the side of policymakers here, engaging partners on various levels. So I think we should recognize there's a lot of going on. Now, looking at the evidence of what's going on, Florian is absolutely correct. I mean, if we do recognize the urgency and the severity of the challenges we are facing, probably as a society, we are not moving fast enough. And what can we do? I mean, there are actions we can take in the short term, and by the way, we only take actions in the short term. I think we should remember that.
Yeah.
So I think that there was because it's a very long discussion, but just to speak to one of the points already mentioned in the chat about risk assessment and so on. Very concretely, I think what can be done is gradually change the approach to impact assessments, risk assessments that concretely frame investment decisions. Look, and again, there's a lot of positive developments around this, not mentioning taxonomy, for example, that my colleagues here developed, and it is to be, it is expected to frame, to influence decisions. So I think that's one area that, as I say, coming from JRC, I would emphasize, is to open for new type of policy tools, different type of evidence that can better inform the investment decisions, considering longer term development. So having this in mind, that whatever decisions we are taking now, we are locking ourselves into a point we are creating future path dependencies. Let's put it this way. Path dependency is not only about the past, but yes, the ambition is there. There's a lot of work to be done to translate it into policy action. Maybe one last point is also the question of coherence, right? I mean, we know that we're looking at different ministries in different countries, so even different directorates general. There is not yet a full alignment in how different ministries or DGs approach certain challenges, how they frame it, how they understand the scope of the challenge, how they understand the time horizon they should focus on. So I think projects like this one can contribute to creating spaces in which stakeholders across different levels and horizontally can create these common frames of reference.
Yeah, thanks. You touched upon the risk assessment question in the chat, and let's finish with that. And I can also say that if you have more questions, I saw there's another one, but we don't have time, unfortunately. But all three of us can write replies in the chat also as we go along. But just to touch upon the risk assessment that you already mentioned, Michał, also, I think that risk assessment and risk management definitely has a stake in resilience, for sure. But maybe not in the traditional probabilistic way, the engineering way of calculating risks, which are extremely important in so many technical fields. But when we talk about resilience, and especially on a societal level, maybe at least from my perspective as a sociologist, it's more about risk understanding, the sense making of risk, and those processes that leads to a more social understanding of risk and how that can be shared among individuals and among stakeholders and actors. So those aspects of risk assessment, some might call them softer. I just think they're wider, are important, I think, for resilience thinking. But just to finish off, Florian, would you like to?
Yeah, definitely, because I've been working a bit on national risk assessments and other forms of risk analyze and risk. And I think like that they can be very useful in principle, risk assessments and risk management approaches to build resilience, but not the way they are done today mostly. I think like if you look at how they are done, you take often like the risks are confused with scenarios. Essentially, like you cover like you just pick a scenario, probably nothing too dramatic, nothing too challenging, because otherwise it would reveal that you're not really prepared. So you take something like nothing too complicated. I've seen it firsthand, like how the scenarios were like twisted to make it handleable. Like, and then you somehow go through the scenario and you complete the exercise, and then the report goes into the shelf. And then, I mean, first thing there is that you should at least have multiple scenarios, so that you see, like, there's not let's say like a pandemic, there's not one type of pandemic. It can, and we've seen it in reality, it can play out in so different ways. And then and there's a real risk if we just say like, okay, we've gone through this scenario, we're ready for the risk. I think this is key, that we are aware that these are not the same. And we have to be humble enough to say, like, okay, even if we have proper risk assessment process, the best, still we will probably miss very dangerous hazards out there, potential events. Probably the most dangerous things we will probably not have in the picture, and that's as long as we are aware of that, I think like risk assessment can be very useful.
Thank you very much, Michał and Florian, for these presentations and for the discussion. And we'll continue the discussion in the chat. Michał, if you happen to have that literature review available that you mentioned on socio-ecological resilience, please put it in the chat, also a link. And with that, thank you everybody for coming in here, and I'll leave it over to Matias to guide us further.
Thank you, Jörgen, Michał, and Florian, for this very interesting discussion. Indeed, I think they are really very important topics right now, and I have also many other questions, but I will leave it at the end. There are too many things to discuss, and we will probably have the opportunity to go on this. Initially, we thought to have a break at the middle of the webinar, but I think it would be nice to move to the second session straight away. So I will give the floor to Kerstin Cuhls. Kerstin is a scientific project manager at the Fraunhofer Institute for System and Innovation Research. She studied Japanology, Chinese studies, and economics and business administration, and she's using all this knowledge into foresight and future research. And she's not only teaching in different universities about foresights and future studies, but she's also involved in several expert groups in the European Commission on the topic. So Kerstin and our colleagues Rowan and Lieve, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Matias. Yeah, welcome to our second part. The second part is called anticipatory resilience. So what does it mean? We have chosen this title because we think we have to be in the future, to look into the future, to think back from the future. And we want to be resilient not only now and not only learn for now to be resilient, but we need to have our heads and our thinking in the future. And that means we have to talk about foresight, futuresible. It depends on how you define it, but we have to discuss also the futures and long-term thinking. And we, in this session part, we are three. We have again 3 statements, short statements, 5 to 7 minutes, and we will start from the bottom up a little bit with Robin Bourgeois, and then go back a little bit more on the scientific path, what foresight is, what we can do with it in resilience thinking. And we come back to policy and policy making at the end of this part of the session. So the first speaker now, or the first statement, is from Robin Bourgeois. He is in our advisory board. So we will learn a lot still during the course of the project from him. He's a senior researcher at CIRAD. And currently he's at ISRA in Senegal. So he is talking to us from Africa. So he has a completely different background, a very interdisciplinary background, from agronomists to really talking about futures anticipation in rural economics and societies. So he is building up really new capacities, and he's trying to democratize a little bit the futures thinking through this kind of capacity building activities. So we are really coming from bottom-up thinking and top-down thinking in his presentation, and he wants to tell us a little bit more about the future as a public good. Robin?
Yeah, thank you, Kerstin. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah, okay, thank you. So thank you for this introduction, and it will be a little bit paradoxical for me to talk about what I'm going to talk while you are telling that I'm working with a bottom-up approach. Actually, this is true, but based on this, I will share with you some thoughts about something that is more general, probably a little bit more conceptual, but I can tell you this is something that can be applied very, very nicely at the field level, if I can say so. What I would like to focus on is how we use the future and what the future can be used for, and which is obviously particularly relevant for this project. And I think we need to recognize that the Future Resilience Project is one of these not so numerous projects which have taken the future very seriously, if I can say that, incorporating it in its core activities, and that has to be really recognized. So I would like to start first with some statements which might seem tautological, but I think it's good to take them in mind, keep them in mind. The first one is, when we are talking about the future, we have to recognize that we are talking about something that does not exist in the present. What exists in the present about the future is only the way we perceive it. And by saying this, it's very practical, because in our everyday life, everyone, each single person in the world is always using the future in any of their activities, because we are planning for the meal of tomorrow. We have a work agenda. We want to see people next week or in 2 years. So we are using the future, mostly implicitly, but we have started to use the future also very explicitly. And this is what the discipline of anticipation has started to take as its core field of research. So people have started to think about how we use the future in the present. And this is where we started for the statement that only perceptions, the perceptions that we held about the future, exist in the present. So the consequence of this is that we can't talk about facts about the future, but we can talk about uncertainties, because the way we perceive the future shows that the difference of perception that we have means that we are not sure about what we believe would happen or could happen. So uncertainty is at the core of this reflection. Now, very often people try to reduce uncertainty, saying, okay, it's not possible. And it's usually what the governments, for example, try to do, reducing uncertainties as much as possible in order to make decisions. My position would be to tell you that we should not consider uncertainties as our enemies, but as our friends. Meaning that instead of trying to reducing them or fighting against uncertainties, we need to use them, we need to explore them. So that means also that the way we use the future, there is also a lot of uncertainty about what could be or should be the best way of using the future. So applying this perception to our own field of activities, we need to recognize that there are different ways of using the future. Saying that, my position is to consider that the future must be treated as a resource. It must be treated as a resource. That means a resource which could be called in economic terms as a public good, in the sense that we must ensure that all have access to it. Everyone can think and use the future, and nobody should be able or in a position to deprive anyone else from using the future. Which means that there is no better way of using the future than others. And we were talking in the session before, we were calling on, for example, governments to become to be core actors in preparing for resilience. But that means that we consider that the future that is perceived by a government will be the future that will be imposed by to everyone, including the citizens in the territory. So this is not my position. And my position is that the capacity to use the future as a public good is something that will contribute to resilience. We have talked about resilience as the capacity to cope, to adapt, and build back better. We were talking about bouncing back, but even bouncing forward, which I think is a completely future-oriented perception of resilience. And this is probably why we have started to include or suggest to use the term anticipatory resilience, which might seem a bit strange, but if you consider that anticipatory resilience could be the capacity to explore with what we may have to cope, explore to what we may have to adapt, and what we could build back together, that we take a slightly different, or we complement the notion of resilience in a different way. We bring the future in our thinking of in the way we think about resilience. And a good example of that was when Jörgen was talking about imagining endings. At the time of the COVID, we did some research on how Foresight practitioners were imagining the after COVID-19 future. And we were surprised to realize that mostly what they were talking about in terms of scenarios was when will we be able to go back to business as usual? And that was the majority of the scenarios that were thought about. And that's probably also consistent with what Florian said about not imagining a future that are completely disruptive. It's more comfortable to imagine that. So the final point here is that if we take seriously the idea of anticipatory resilience, it means that if we change today the way we think about resilience, anticipating the different type of crisis, imagining the different type of crisis, the different type of shocks, and going back to the present and looking in the present if we can see the seeds or the pockets of those future shocks already there in the present and take them into consideration to act now. That means that the business as usual future that we will have to revert once one crisis will have happened would be a better business as usual than the one that we expect, the one that we have today. So this is basically why I joined the project, believing very much that we need to share and to develop the capacity of all citizens to think about the future and to develop their own perception of what resilience is, based on this anticipatory approach, so that a government, for example, or a private company will not impose its own vision of the future and its own vision of what resilience should be. It has to be something that will be shared and built, created together with all the inhabitants and all the people who are engaged and working, for me, at territorial level, but it's also true for national or even international level. And I know that after that, Kerstin will go even more in details regarding all these concepts. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, I'm not intending to go too much into detail, but I think in our project of future resilience, we will come back to that in the different cases and the different labs and the different demonstrators that we hopefully will work with. And I would like to go back to foresight and why we need foresight, why we need what we call foresight. And for us, foresight is defined as the systematic debate about complex futures. So that is already all included that we were discussing in the previous session. It is long-term, but what means long-term? For some, long-term is really 30, 100 years, even after a crisis. For others, long-term means 1, 2, 3 years, and really the end of one crisis and entering the next one. So we are working on different horizons. We are working on different items, themes that are brought together interdisciplinarily, and we are working with different actors, and you would call it participatory, and sometimes we are talking about participatory foresight, but per se, foresight includes different stakeholders who have to be included in the discussions with their different perspectives, with their different biases also, in order to make different things happen. We already heard about that foresight, or that we have to think in alternatives, but not only from different perspectives. We also have to choose alternatives, those alternatives that are more preferable than the other alternatives. So we have to come to terms with what are we really wanting, what are we really like to head for, and what are we avoiding. So really have the range of all these different aspects to make us more resilient, but that is not easy. We have a lot of contradicting goals in between that, and we have to figure these out. Therefore, I would like, and I always say that, sorry, but I would like to remind us that there are different futures ahead. We are talking about the possible futures, those that are possible in any way. Some can be shaped by humans, others cannot, they just happen. So we have then we have the second category, that's the likely or more unlikely futures, feasible or not, that we sometimes assess. We have heard about risk assessment and sometimes calculate, but we have to be aware what these calculations tell us. So if you have a risk of 20%, what does that mean for you? And we have the desirable futures, those where we can create really joint visions, joint futures, and where we join forces and energies to head towards these ones. And this is really a third and very important one, because here also the sense making is important. What does it mean for me to interpret the knowledge that we have about futures in a way that we create desirable futures, but also identify the contradictions in between? So sense making is one of the most important part in participatory foresight, but also in general, because here we have to figure out what does it really mean for me as an organization, for me as a person, for me in a crisis, and for what can be done at all. So what is the weight of that? And we have already evidence that the more dispersed and available this kind of knowledge is, and the resources to do that are, the more people can make use of it. Of course, you are trained, you are prepared, and in case of emergency or opportunity also, opportunity for innovation, for example, you understand better what the chances are, what your opportunities are, and what you can do. So knowledge valorization and a better distribution of this kind of R&I knowledge, of futures knowledge, of foresight knowledge, make us per se more resilient and make us more capable of acting and reacting. So this is what we were talking about in the sense of transformative capacity and capabilities also. It gives people really agency. So it brings you back, and even in times of crisis, it brings you back into action instead of just staring at what's happening now. And it means it is very difficult to prepare for single events. So we cannot forecast single events. We know a lot that might be ahead, but we cannot prepare for them, for all of them. We discussed that already in the previous session. But we can develop a kind of preparedness for things that may occur or not. And it's better to equip us with this kind of preparedness as a kind of attitude, a kind of flexibility in thinking, and also in acting. And that means we really have to develop one by one on single cases, on every level of our societies, a kind of culture of more forecasting than we normally do. And even a bit more also longer term, to be agile in case we need it, to be active in case we need it. And this will be the point where we will, in the project Future Resilience, experiment with a lot of cases. And of course, there will be a call for cases, for additional cases. So there is the possibility to apply for being one of the case, and we do a kind of foresight with you and test some of the tools that we have. So this is a promise, and yeah, let's see what's happening. But we still have the way to go to policymaking. And here we come to our next statement, and this is from Lieve Van Woensel. She is already retired now, but you may still know her from her work in the European Parliament. And before that, she headed the Scientific Foresight Service within the European Parliamentary Research Service, better known often with the abbreviation of EPRS, where she constantly introduce a lot of foresight methods into these kind of scientific advisory processes. She still acts as advisor here and there, and we are very glad to have her here to tell us a little bit from her experience in policymaking and in her field. Lieve, for you.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. I hope my connection is okay because I had a technical problem. So I'm connected by my iPhone. So good morning, everyone. This was already a very, very interesting kickoff of this project. So as Kerstin said, I will give some reflections about how foresight is used in European policy and if it can be useful. So in my experience, foresight can help policymakers to make well-informed and future-assessed decisions, and not only evidence-based, because we are all used to evidence-based policy. That's quite safe. This is based upon things we know and for which we can create a very actionable information for policymakers. So it's all going beyond that evidence. It's also taking into account societal context of policy decisions and looking into the future. So what foresight is, it provides a systematic and structured approach to analyzing policy issues and evaluating ex-ante policy outcomes. And that's also very important, that you look in advance you think in advance about a possible impact of what you want to decide with your policy. So foresight is a practice that can be useful in a variety of ways in public policy at different stages in the policy cycle. Like in European policy cycles, you have, for instance, the priority setting at the beginning of a legislature. You have policy formulation, policy evaluation. And taking a foresight approach helps policymakers develop policy options that are resilient and adaptable to future uncertainties. And these words of uncertainties and resilience have already been used a lot today. So foresight can help policymakers to anticipate possible unintended consequences and enhance the long-term effectiveness. And especially scenario-based foresight is a very rewarding practice, not only in European policy, I think in general. What scenarios are different alternatives, so different imaginaries of the future. Florian already spoke about real and imagined endings of crisis, for instance. The real ones are what's really going to happen, but this we do not know. So foresight is not to predict the future. Foresight is to be prepared for things that might happen. And the future is almost by definition is unknown. So it's all about uncertainties. And there is an interesting concept to see in which type of futures you can have. And this is called the cone of plausibilities. And this gives different types of futures. So you have today and the far future, and then you have the expected future based upon what's happening today and the changes which we know that happen today. For instance, let's say climate, the global warming, or population growth. So you have preferred futures, you have desired futures, expected futures, you have plausible futures, but you also have futures which are seen as implausible. And it's quite interesting to work with a small selection of very diverse futures. What's important in futures is the impact and the likelihood. And what's the most interesting for building resilience is focusing on high impact futures. So scenarios can be seen as a tool to explore and experiment with possible futures, basically to rehearse the future. You do not know which future we will get, but you can imagine a possible future and you can step into it in a thought experiment with people from different backgrounds in a participatory way to see what will this mean for us. And this really helps to rehearse what could happen. It helps to figure out what risks, challenges and opportunities each future, so each scenario might have for the whole policy ecosystem, including all the people and groups that the policy affects. So participatory, interdisciplinary, and so on. So it's a tool to prepare, to be prepared, to be flexible, to be resilient. So to be proactive and to think about the capabilities to anticipate. So scenario-based foresight is really the main method in strategic foresight. It's a very powerful and useful practice to develop actionable knowledge for policymaking. And this actionable knowledge, when foresight generated, is really information that can be trusted and used for decision making. So in some, foresight can help ensure long term of policies and the relevance for society. So it's useful to ensure that EU policies are to a large extent future-proof and preparing Europe for possible events, possible crises. So I leave it there for the moment. Back to Kerstin.
Thank you, Lieve. Before we hand over to the general discussion, I would like to ask you, do you have any direct questions to us here about anticipatory resilience and the foresight part, the longer term view?
About the longer term view, there were, it's already mentioned, there are different ways of putting time horizons, like in European Parliament, and I think in European policy in general, we have always two horizons in mind. The first one is the next elections, the next legislature, which will start a package of the legislative cycle, and the other one is the longer term. And the longer term, there I mean, like we think about 2050, 2100, especially in terms of climate change and so on. And the other part of your question, sorry, I
also meant that our participants can be included a little bit in our discussion. So are there any questions from the participants? You can use the chat, or I'm not sure if you can really talk here in this kind of webinar. Are there any questions to the foresight part of the project? I have already seen that we have volunteers for our cases. So we keep you on board and keep you posted. This is really a good idea.
Yes, I'm looking into the chat questions. But basically, resilience has a lot to do with imagination. If you really can imagine, like if you would prepare a movie about a disaster scenario or a dream scenario, then you can really put yourself in. And I think for all foresighters, it's important to put yourself not only in an open mind, but in a very creative mind to think about solutions. And this can help a lot to be prepared to develop capabilities.
Yes, we use a lot of mental time traveling there also, not only the physical ones and the physical jumps into the future, so also traveling in mind. Robert.
Yes, thank you, Kerstin. We had a common question, which was something like, what could governments on different administrative levels do to apply research and innovation better to build societal resilience? From my perspective, I think this question should be complemented also by two aspects. One is, why have governments on different administrative levels not yet been able to satisfactorily apply research and innovation in order to better build societal resilience? Because if we are making these questions, we have an implicit statement that it's not the case yet. And the question is not only what kind of recommendations we could give the governments to apply it better, but also understanding why. And for me, part of the why is that the way we see societal resilience and we imagine the future of resilience differs from the position you have. And that was part of what I was saying earlier. I mean, a government's perception of the future of societal resilience should, in practice, but this is a very bold statement, should be in practice reflecting the aspirations of the people who have elected them regarding how they see societal resilience. And for me, the main question is, why isn't it the case? So that's a food for thought, probably also for the project itself.
Yes, and maybe it's also a power game. Maybe it's also a power game inside. So the ones who have power, are in the networks, are heard or dominant, and the others are not. So we are often also talking about colonizing the future by certain groups. We have to deal with that, I guess. Michael.
I think Peter was ahead of me. Peter, if he can speak, if you can unmute his microphone. Peter Desmet from the audience.
Yeah,
thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Peter Desmet, working for Strategic Insights Analysis in Flanders. My point is that it's really interesting, and I think the idea of linking resilience and foresight is essential to avoid the kind of locking that we experienced with every big crisis that we faced. And my point that I want to raise is that, and also put it in the chat, that we use a lot the Three Horizons framework in a sense that there are elements from the present and the future, but also the past already now. And we used that during COVID. We had an indicator set to explain to society how our recovery was not only focusing on getting out of the COVID, but also that the initiatives were an investment in the future resilience. So that was the point that I wanted to make, and we started quite with a small framework, and we got some feedback from the scientific community, and it was recognized now also within society that it's a way to go, and I hope that will also find its way in this project. And if you're interested in more information, I will also provide my email.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Now, Michał.
Thank you. And it's a more an open question. I think that the points just raised about the importance of thinking about alternative pathways is absolutely crucial. And it's not only about imagination, and importantly, collective imagination, but it's as always with Foresight, linking it to also programming periods, financial cycles. There are many time horizons we have to think of, and we know that this was always the biggest challenge, I think, for Foresight, is to cross this bridge to strategy and then to policy and so on. And I think that linking it with resilience, which adds a material risk into the discussion sometimes, real urgency, could be the way to make Foresight more impactful, because we are also bringing another type of audiences with us, insurance companies, financial, institutional investors. I mean, this is potentially something that could help us to cross this bridge. And the question for me is there is a renewed discussion on what does subsidiarity means in the context of this shift to new transformative approaches to innovation policy. In other words, what are the right levels, not one level, but right levels to address different type of challenges, considering existing capacities to address them. And this speaks to this multi-level governance approach to it. So for example, I was speaking about place-based approach. It's not a naive place-based approach when you're thinking how to make a place, autonomous or self-sufficient. It's more a question how places can find themselves into a multi-level reality. How can they mobilize resources from different other places, other levels of governance to react? So I think creating this imaginaries across territories, across different levels, this could be and translating them into ideas that are, and pardon my language, maybe provocatively fundable on, for example, for municipalities, could be something to discuss maybe and consider in the cases that the project will look at.
Thank you. I guess we are now fluently into the general discussion, and the next on the list is Florian.
Yes, thanks, Kerstin. And I want to come back to a point that you raised about power, because I think that's a very important issue. Often people think or pretend that they, as if the actors don't know why they what the risks are there. Why can't they see the risks? Why don't they see the value of investing in resilience? And my experience is that if you also look at the private sector, but also like public sector, decision makers are not stupid. They can do the maths. They are well aware of like the risks. I mean, like just a couple of meters away from here, a big bank proved not to be very resilient last week. And I think like they were well aware of the risks, the people in charge there, but they took the risks because they had no incentives to invest in resilience. And if we want to have like resilience institutions, if we want to have systemic resilience, we have to somehow like ensure that the risks are not like generalized, externalized to society, but like that, and this is, I think, like this doesn't work without like also regulation at some point, and I think like that's very important, and it's you could continue with climate change. I mean, like if I mean, like there's. Like if you look at the IPCC report, like it's so clear what and the challenges that we are facing, and still like there are powerful interests who have no, like powerful players who have little interest to invest in resilience, even though if the challenge is so obvious. So I think like we have to come up with solutions for that. Thanks.
Yes, we are in some obvious futures already, and we are in some that are not that obvious, or some we do not want to see. So there is a broad range of different things that we are facing. Lieve?
Yes, thank you. On the question, what could governments on different levels do to apply R&I better to build societal resilience? I think there are some elements which could be brought together. So everything is related, I mean, everything we discussed today is related to uncertainties of the future. But a first element is that one can decrease the level of uncertainty by expanding the type of evidence we use, the type of research we need, and so on. And this can be done in a Foresight approach. It's already mentioned a lot. So the words participatory, collectively, are really key elements here. But a part of a Foresight approach is that one really tries to take a step back and see the bigger picture and do a stakeholders analysis. Who is concerned about an issue? Who can influence it, but also who is affected by it? And the tricky thing is to really do a good stakeholder analysis to see which elements of evidence we have and how to involve these different stakeholders with very wisely chosen representatives in a participatory discussion. Someone mentioned the word power game. So this can be avoided by really doing a good stakeholder analysis and guarding the process. So the people collecting the research, the evidence, really have to be the guardians of the process. The process of foresight for being prepared for the future should be very transparent, but also that you don't allow power games, but that you have a participatory collective approach where the different stakeholders have the same level of voice. But also when you see after such a brainstorming with everyone involved, you can see which evidence basically you didn't look into. Like for COVID, it was obvious in the beginning, everyone looked into the health issues, but what with economical issues, with political issues, with psychological issues, and so on. So you can get down the level of uncertainty by adding more evidence, which is in other areas. So the interdisciplinarity is important in the evidence, and the multidisciplinarity is important in all the discussion between everyone involved in the R&D. So I will leave it with this at this moment. So transparency, guardians of the process, and be very collective, inclusive, and participatory in the process would already help for building societal resilience.
Yes, and we always have the tendency to look back, what went well. But in the future, sometimes these things that in the past went quite well do not go that smoothly in the future. So driving forward, really having transformative, really changing capacity needs a bit more. And it really needs this kind of driver in the seat, means policymakers on board. I would like to end this part of the session and then hand over to Matias by a question I was asked last week. It was in German, but I translated it to English. And I think it's, for me, it is a very thoughtful question. And that is, when will things go back to the way they never were? So hopefully we really make this point of being resilient to a certain extent, but changing something with foresight and with a view into better futures also at the same point and at the same time. So we hopefully find some processes to do that. And now back to Matias, who has other questions, I guess.
Thank you, Kerstin, and thank you everybody for this interesting discussion. I didn't want to interrupt because all the questions were in terms of foresight, but I still see that there is Georgios Koliarakis that has the raised hand. So Georgios, your mic is allowed, so if you want to make the question, you need to open the microphone and just pose it directly. And this is also an invitation for everybody. If you have any question, please raise your hand, and we will give you the opportunity to speak.
Thanks very much. Hello, I happen to know to have met in the past with Kerstin Cuhls, but also with Lieve Van Woensel. Just I work with the German Council on Foreign Relations, and I come from the area of security policy, and we have been advising governmental institutions and ministries on that very politicized field. Experience is that it is very tough to decide on trade-offs of risk. As Florian Roth has commented correctly, that it is not that challenges are not known. It is about prioritization, and it is very tough to earmark budget for something that might happen in the further horizon. I think policymakers and politicians run after crisis. It is much easier to prioritize on something that, I mean, your backyard is burning. You need to channel attention, material and immaterial resources. And then this is how somehow strategic surprise happens. It is very often also this self-inflicted blindness, but also an incapacity to simply to prioritize things that are not burning here and now. So perhaps to connect that issue of resilience, which is in some respect forward-looking, would be the notion of risk trade-off. And a big part of it is politics. It is not only evidence or forward-looking insights. I can see also Lieve having a slight smile on that, because this is a very tough game. And I do not think that, I mean, it deserves more exploration, but I think this will be a challenge to stay also in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Georgios. I don't know, Lieve or Kerstin, if you want to comment on top of that.
Maybe it's a very, it's really a key issue that we don't prioritize, and I speak we because it's basically a general thing, on things which are not burning, or on things we really don't want to happen. So we don't want to think about very negative scenarios. I think that's I have discussed this with people with background in psychology and so on. It seems that the human brain really tries not to think about the things on which we really have to be prepared, because we think, yeah, and they will not happen, so let's switch to something else. Of course, it's also an issue of resources. It's a prioritization, which is a political issue in political institutions, because you need to put to free resources to really rehearse, as I said, rehearse a scenario which you see as a disaster scenario. So thank you, Georgios, for bringing this up.
Rowan, you were first in line.
Yes, just reacting on Georgios' point, which is very, very important, and also challenges the way we feel that the future should be or could be used. If you imagine that there is a chance for your backyard to burn one day, it doesn't mean that you have to wait until it burns in order to do something about it. And I'm not talking just in terms of investment. Yes, even talking in terms of investment. If you have to invest massively in order to prevent something that you imagine it could happen, but you don't think that it is very likely to happen, that it's very difficult to convince people to invest in that. But you can still imagine what would be the best reaction that you could have if that thing happened. I mean, if your backyard was burning, what would you do actually for that? And I just take an example of the COVID-19 in France, we destroyed the stock of face masks because they were somehow expensive to maintain, and at the time when we desperately needed the face masks, we had none left. So and that we were not talking about millions of euros, in terms of so can we? Is there a possibility that we can use the future at least in order to, if we can't do better than that, have some kind of safeguards that would not be too expensive, but with creativity, with imagination, thinking about ways where we could help mitigating or preventing those things, and if they still happened, having already some kind of preparedness that will not require from decision makers to hugely justify and invest big amounts of money. It's just a question. It's not a theoretical question. It's a very practical one, actually, because we've seen that in our everyday life over the last five years, I would say.
My reflection goes into the same direction because it's very difficult to approach policymakers directly and tell them what they should prioritize and what they should do or how they could react. It's better than to do it indirectly, or to prepare others and more people, those who can be, in case they need it, be creative, be active, be agent in that case. And that is why we often infiltrate our systems with foresight thinking and foresight teaching at different levels, not only at universities, but at very different institutions and very different institutes, but even, of course, also with policymakers or with people in our ministries. Just in making these people aware of this kind of things that could go on. And there's another point in this whole discussion that is hierarchical thinking. Often policy making is really top-down hierarchical decision making, and in case of urgency, in case of crisis, when you have to be active, hierarchies are often broken, and they are often not that helpful. So in that case, people keep to be active if the knowledge is divided and among many others, and many people have more ideas to be creative, to solve at least some of the problems, and to be kept in an active mode. Thanks.
Thank you, Kerstin. Florian?
Yes, thanks. I want to come back also to Joshua's question, like why should we invest in something that prepare for an event that's not most likely is not going to materialize, or we're not sure when or how, or only once we are retired or so. And I think like the static understanding of resilience doesn't really help us that much. If you like invest in robust structures and redundancies and nothing happens, then it does not really help you, then it's, so to speak, a lost investment. But if you think of like transformative resilience, like really like or anticipatory resilience, all the building blocks of such an approach, they are, I believe, no regret investments. If you invest in the ability to experiment, to improvise, to forecast, to anticipate, to self-organize, as Kerstin just like stressed out, like to have like a modularity in the system. These are all things that also are very useful, also like not only in crisis situations, but also like in normal times, so to speak. And I think like that's often like when I also talk like with private sector people, they're so like, if you focus on the things that foster your organizational resilience, but that also help you like in like just doing your business. And I think there are many options, and then that's like something very attractive about like these new approaches to resilience.
It's a very interesting point, Florian. For a question of time, Lieve, you will be the last one making a question or a comment.
Thank you very much. I have two comments. The first one is linked to what Florian said. We are, in general, not prepared to prepare us for disasters which we do not know. But on the other hand, we are like everyone knows what fire drills are and so on. So it seems that we are prepared for disasters which we know, which have happened in the past, for which we have a lot of evidence from the history on how it works. So this is always a comparison I give to people who say, yes, but this is something which will not happen when we speak about a possible disaster scenario. So there we simply have to compare with fire drills and so on. We are prepared for prevention, mitigation and so on. And then all related to this, and what Kerstin said is basically a key element, is that we really have to embed foresight in policy work. Like in the parliament, we had a big project on foresight literacy, where we gave trainings to members of parliament with one of their team members. We had training for staff of the parliament about foresight thinking, so that they really had a very clear frame on what they should keep in mind in a foresight mode. And I think we cannot do more than on all the levels of administration really ensure that everyone understands the principles of foresight thinking for broadening in scope of society and in time. So that's a question of investment that administrations should do, also for people involved in research and investment. That was what I wanted to add. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lieve. And I think for a question of time, we have only 5 minutes left, so I will just would like to say a few words. First of all, I would like to say that the discussions were actually very interesting. So there is actually no much that we can add right now, that it's going to be probably redundant, but there are many topics that we should probably take over and discuss in future open discussions in terms of webinars, but also in participation in the project. One thing is myself working in crisis and disaster for more than 10 years is now thinking about the foresight and the future thinking. I like a lot to read dystopian literature, and people that knows me very well, and how I engage that passion with my work. And in the literature, they always ask the question, what would happen if the war ends, or if a crisis will hit? And here this project is a bit about what could happen, but also what we can do right now with the instruments and the tools we have. There is a lot of things done in Europe in many areas, not only in the policy making, but also in the research, and also in third sector, in different societies, different contexts. And our idea is to try to go with that. And I would like also to make a small reflection on a question that was on the chat. It was if the topics that we are going to talk will be limited or not, if we can include the digital. Actually, and there was a question that we receive a lot, if we are focusing on climate resilience, and there are too many projects working on climate resilience, but our project is going beyond that. So we want to talk about climate crisis, but we also want to talk about different kinds of crises that are hitting constantly. A pandemic, we are talking about a migration crisis, a financial crisis, an energy crisis, so all the things that have been said. So this is something that it's important to keep in mind, because in the coming months we are going to release the guidelines for the pilots for this open call. So when you apply, you will have a selection of topics, but of course we will keep it open for new proposals. So if you know that there are some type of crisis that you want to apply, or any specific topic, that could be much welcome. You have today a very quick, let's say, taste and degustation of the topics that we will work in the project. So just keep in the loop. We posted the website, the social media, and from there you can be constantly informed about the developments of the projects, the open call that we will release, and so on and so far. So thank you very much to all the speakers and to all the audience for staying over these 2 hours. We have to say I'm sorry we didn't put the break in between, but I think the discussion was very, very much interesting. Both of the sessions were really enlightening this Wednesday. So I hope you have a very nice rest of the week and enjoy the spring that is coming already in Europe, or if you are in another hemisphere, let's start enjoying the autumn. So thank you very much and have a good day all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Matias. Bye.
Bye and success with the project.